Column and bar graphs. So a column graph is where we represent data in a vertical column with a space between each column, and a bar graph is basically the same thing except it's done horizontally. So instead of being vertical columns, it's horizontal like that. When we draw these graphs, there's a few things we've got to keep in mind. All graphs need a title. We need either the categories or some sort of numerical scale with equally spaced intervals, and that's on our horizontal axis. We need a numerical scale with our equally spaced intervals up on the vertical axis. We have to label both axes, both the horizontal or x-axis, tell us what the variable actually is, and on the y-axis or the vertical axis shows us what the frequency is. And we've got to have a small gap between each column, and it shows that we are dealing with categorical data or discrete data. Alright, worked example 8. This frequency table shows responses for a group of children who are asked, what is your favourite colour? Only one response per student was recorded. Draw a column graph to represent this information. Okay, so we're talking categorical data because it's each a specific category or specific colour that they like. Alright, what's my lowest number? 5. My biggest number, 19. So I'm going to need a scale that runs up, the frequency's got to run up to beyond 19. Let's have a look at how we do that. Okay, so because I'm going to draw a graph, I'll try and make it neat. Rule my lines. Like this. The graph will continue. Okay. So, up the side, I'm going to have my frequency. Now, we said the smallest number was 5 and the biggest number was 19. So my scale here has got to go up to beyond 19. So we'll say we'll take it up to 20. If I put my 10 about halfway, that'll be about 15 and that'll be about 5. You'd measure these spaces with a ruler to make sure it's completely even. Alright, mine aren't quite even, but I don't have any lines on my page to do that. Now, on my horizontal axis is the actual categories that I'm dealing with, so I'll just write them straight off the data table. We had green, blue, red, purple, yellow, orange. Okay, and all we do is we draw a bar for each one. So under green we had 12 responses. So we would use a ruler and draw a line up to 12. And you'd do that with your ruler. The blue we had 15 responses, so that's there. Red was 19, that was our big one, so just short of 20. Purple was 11, which would be, so less than 12, but more than 10. So it's about there. Yellow was 5. And orange was 13. So a bit more than my 12. About there. Now, let's run through what we need. We need a title. We haven't got a title on this, so we've got to call it something. Just make up something descriptive. Favourite colour, that'll do. When you draw these columns, we need labels on things. So this is colour. That's my frequency. Numbered, evenly spaced. You need spaces between your bars on the bar graph. Try and keep them even. I haven't quite done it on mine, but it's a bit hard because I haven't got lines to do it on my page. And we're showing this discrete data because, categorical data, because they're all individual columns separated from each other. And we try and keep all the spacing the same. Histograms. The big difference between a column or bar graph and a histogram is that column graphs have the vertical columns with a space between each column, and we use them for categorical data or for ungrouped discrete data. With the histogram, we're still using vertical columns, but there's no space between them, and each column has a range of values rather than single values. Histograms are a lot more useful for continuous data. So, when we draw a histogram, there's a number of things we've got to include. Title, scales on the x-axis along the horizontal, a numerical scale equally spaced up the y-axis, labels on both the axes, no gap between each column, and that's an important one, and more of a procedural thing, a half column width before the first column, before the first set of data, even if our first set of data starts with 0. All right, we'll see that in our example. Worked example 9. 100 Year 7 students were surveyed about the number of hours they spent watching TV over the weekend. The data is listed below. Now, the number of hours can vary, because you can watch half an hour of TV, for example. So, number of spent hours, so 0 to less than 1 hour, there were 8 students that did that. Between 1 hour and less than 2 hours, so under 2 hours, 17 students, and so on. And so 6 students had 5 or more hours. Our task, draw a histogram to represent this data. Okay, so the first thing we want to know is the usual things. That is, what's our smallest value? So, number of students is what we're going to have up the y-axis, because that's the actual thing that we're measuring in our survey. There's our smallest value, 6. Our biggest one is 32. So 32 students watched between 3 and 4 hours of TV. Alright, so that's what our scale needs to be on a y-axis. So let's have a look at that. Okay, so we'll draw up our axes. And typically they can continue. All right. Up the side, we're going to have the number of students, that's our frequency side. And along the bottom is what we're actually, the actual categories we have, which is the number of hours. So, this will be time in hours. And we have the categories that we were given, so 0 to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and so on up to 5. So, running out of space there. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 will do. Up the side is our frequency. And we need to get up to above 32. So we'll just have an easy scale. I reckon we'll go up to 35. So I'll make that 30, 25, 20, 15, 10, 30, and these are supposed to be evenly spaced, and if you had a ruler, you could put your ruler on there and measure the distances. It's a little bit more difficult on my page where I don't have the lines to do it. Okay, and now we start putting our data on. So, the first group was between 0 and 1 hours, so my bar is going to go between 0 and 1. And you can see I'm leaving about half a width gap at the start here. So 0 to 1 student, 0 to 1 hours had 8 students. So that would be up to there. And once again, you'd use a ruler and do this nice and neatly. 1 to 2 hours had 17 students. So that would take us up to, and you can see our data is continuous. So we're joining all the bars on our histogram together. 2 to 3 hours was 27. 32. 10 and 6. So 10 hours will be there, and 6 is there. Now, we need a title for our graph, so we'll call it number of hours watching TV. Number of hours watching TV. You can make it a little bit more descriptive if you like, talking about number of hours spent by Year 7 students watching TV over the weekend, make it a bit more complete, but just something that describes what we're actually doing. You can see we've got our gap at the start here. These should be evenly sized columns. These numbers should be evenly spaced with a label, and if there's units, we have the units. Up the side here, I've written frequency. I could have written number of students, probably a little bit more correct to do that. Evenly spaced increments up the side there, and a title on the top. There's our histogram done.